call us to order. I know David's here and he'll be here in just a few minutes, so we're right at 10:36. And I know that Kim is headed in. Kay is on the phone, and David will be here in a few minutes. So we'll move forward. I'll entertain a motion to approve today's agenda.
So moved.
Looking for a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded for approval of the agenda. Any discussion? Okay, we'll move forward. All those approved. How about approval of the minutes? The notes were not sent out until this weekend. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at them. I know I was looking at them last night. I need a motion to approve the minutes. Second?
Right. I know that
Yes,
Kim
second.
is headed in.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Anyone against? Okay, we're going to move forward. So we do have timeframes on my agenda here today. We're going to try to keep to them as closely as we can. Seth, we're going to ask you and Hilda to help keep us on track with time. I'd like to recommend that you look at the letter from Julie Smith regarding recommendations supporting rural schools in Oregon. It was not sent in the packet, but you did get it electronic, so if you can please check that when you have a chance. There's no action required. Oh, it is now? Okay, thank you.
It is in the packet.
Yep, it's a letter that says chalkboard. It should be right there.
Any discussion?
Have to look under March 30, or March meeting.
Right.
Anyone against? Okay, we're going to move forward. So we do have time frame for my agenda here today. We're going to do this.
Okay.
Those listening on the phone, if you could please mute your phones. And if you're listening to the stream, it is a little bit lagging, so we're actually hearing the stream about 5 seconds later than...
Got it.
It was not sent in the packet, but you did get it electronic, so if you can please check that when you have a chance. There's no action required. Oh, it is now? Okay, thank you.
Those who are listening on the phone, please mute your phone. If you're listening to the live stream, we're getting the feedback from them.
Yvonne, are you looking for comments?
If you'd like to comment, go ahead. On Julie's.
I'm just looking through the letter, and I think, Julie obviously took some of the feedback from the previous meeting. I'm very pleased to see how she looked at the graduation rate, but then the matriculation rate on college, because that's a pretty common issue in the rural settings, is 100% graduation, but nothing's going on. One thing that I think maybe should be included in this is the equity lens issue as far as teachers of color, administrators of color. This is a major issue in the rural school districts as well. It's not something new. It's been something that's been discussed for many, many years, but we don't seem to have the pool or the I don't know if the word is wherewithal, but it seems like we're not persistent in this area. And I would like that to be looked at from the rural framework. I know this is a problem for Oregon, but it's even more exasperated in the rural areas.
Okay. Great, we'll note that. Anything else before we move forward? So we've also provided a draft template for the subcommittee recommendations on the ELL recommendations. We asked you to review them and send any suggestions on the format to me and Hilda before the April meeting.
That's just a template that we can use to frame each of our big sections of our recommendations. And just, you need to let me know if you have suggestions about how you like it formatted.
Okay. In your binder, I think you'll find a note sheet. There we go. It says best practices in student transition subcommittee note sheet for subcommittee members review and discussion. If you will glance down at the questions, these are the questions we want to be ready to pull out of presentations if we're not hearing them. How does what you're reviewing specifically address the specific outcomes identified in the achievement compact? What specific increases will the ideas presented produce? How are we leveraging existing resources and policy implications? This is the template we're giving to presenters so that they can make sure to identify these. Isn't this
Some
the
degree of
information?
verbally sharing that with you.
Verbally sharing it, okay. So these should drive our conversations, and we should make sure, are you finding it?
Where is it again?
It's right behind the agenda.
Okay.
No, it isn't. It's the last page of the first stapled packet,
Okay.
the agenda on it. No, it's with the meeting notes. Right before the kindergarten assessment results and next steps. Okay.
I had sent each of you this
Yep.
individually.
I've seen them electronically, I'm having a hard time finding them.
Looks like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take just a couple of minutes for each. We decided to integrate into our meetings reports from the other subcommittees so that we can kind of keep track of what one another is doing. So Lynn Saxon, I think you and Kim were going to be ready to share with us a 2-minute sharing of what's going on at Early Learning Council, what you're focusing on.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back just for a minute to the draft template for the subcommittee recommendations.
Okay.
I thought these questions, the note sheet for subcommittees review and discussion, I thought this frame was excellent and very, very helpful. I guess my question is, how does that fit in with our business plan and our timelines? Because part of what and it may be here and I'm happy to say that I missed it, but what I'm not clear is our business plan and our timelines for producing real best practices, bringing them forward and incorporating them with 40-40-20 for successful implementation.
So if you look at the colored chart that Hilda provided for us, and I don't exactly know where it is in the binder right now, but we have a colored sheet that shows all the areas we're focusing on and the timeline for when we will take recommendations to the full OEIB.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do as we hear these presentations, like the ones we'll hear today, is to try to focus the conversations so that we really get down to what are those recommendations that we as a best practice panel ought to be furthering on to the full OEIB. And sometimes these presentations have a lot of information, but really we need to be focusing on what do we as a best practice panel need to say. We heard some things that we think we want to support and
Right.
get OEIB to move forward, maybe
Right.
policy recommendations or those.
So perhaps if I could be directed to that, and I would respectfully request that that document be visible and used as a guidepost at each of our meetings so that we can directly plug in what we're hearing into that time frame. I think
The only thing I can suggest is that you have been, at this point, the last meeting, we actually did provide you with some initial lists of the recommendations
Right.
that you have heard. And
Right.
I would imagine that our April meeting is going to extensively involve you now honing in on what are we actually wanting to recommend. And so we are on track for that. And the timeline is simply showing you when we're trying to bring forward recommendations to the OEIB for
So-
each topic.
I appreciate that. Can you point me to the document?
I certainly will do that while we move on.
Okay, so shall we come back to your report from early learning?
No, I'm happy to do that right now.
Okay.
Okay. Kim, are you on the phone as well?
She's headed in from the parking lot.
Okay, well, I will update and Kim will supplement. Last month, the Early Learning Council approved 3 more counties to be early learning hubs, and you can find all of their information posted under current hubs at www.oregonearlylearning.com. I want to thank all the people who were involved in that process. It was a lot of work, but it was productive. In January, as many of you have heard and seen in the Oregonian, the Department of Education released the kindergarten assessment data to school districts. This was a very exciting and productive step for us. Really, it has taken us really 3 years of good work, which you're going to see presented today, but it is remarkably exciting to finally have a toehold in identifying where we are and where we need to go with our efforts on the early learning side of the equation. So we're very excited about that. The QRIS is rolled out. You'll notice we're not calling it the TQRIS because people can't say that many
What
letters.
is the QRIS?
It's now called the QRIS, the Quality Rating and Improvement System. And it's a piece of work that Oregon has had underway for some time with regard to improving our child care system, and it's a star rating system, not unlike energy efficient windows, which I say respectfully, I think it's easy for consumers to have something that is simple and speaks to them in terms they understand, and this, I think, will do that. It's impacting about 13,000 plus kids in Oregon, and we expect to be, we're just getting started with this, but we expect to be seeing some pretty solid impacts on the market in the near future. So that's what we've been up to. We convene next week again in the process, and Kim, thank you for, I know, it's hard to get here. In the process, I think we've also been looking at early learning programs across the state and have learned a lot about what can drive our efforts towards getting the results we expect in the time frame we've identified. Kim, I will defer to you, and I'm sure you may have something to add.
I don't even know what you said, so I'm sorry.
Hubs, I talked about hubs, that
Yes.
we're up and rolling, the
Yeah.
QRIS, and the kindergarten readiness assessment, that all of those things are on track moving forward, and
This is our quick update.
And
of what's
yes,
specific.
yes, you know, I don't think I have anything to add, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you. This is a new piece of our meeting, so now we're doing it for the first time, and then we'll just keep this going. David, how about from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission?
Sure, thanks, Chair Curtis. The Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the HEC, has a really long list of tasks from the legislature and various agencies and departments to complete on. I'll just go through the list here of most of the things the HEC has been tasked with. There's even more, to be honest. I'll look at credit for prior learning to be accreditation for degrees and diplomas, looking at credit for prior learning, including work and life experience. They have a course standardization report that's been completed that calls for working with faculty and on the local scale and a statewide convening of faculty and administrators to talk about standardized course numbers, at least for some of the more basic introductory and transfer courses, to align those among all the institutions in Oregon. They've approved a reciprocal agreement for online courses between the states. It's known by its acronym SARA, Statewide Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. Thank you. I always forget the second A, which is working to set standards if a student takes an online course whatever institution, at least public institution throughout the U.S., that can be transferred to other institutions. So I think it's a really good cause. Definition of 40-40-20. I think this is coming later on our joint meeting agenda, but particularly the middle 40%. The HEC's approved a very broad definition of that, and also define the post-secondary part of 40-40-20 has not just including the what's sometimes termed the pipeline, the younger students, the 18 to 25-year-old students, but also older students, adult and returning students should also be included in those goals to better serve the entire population. Looking at different funding formulas, funding appropriations that are not just based on the enrollment model, or looking at strategic or targeted funding. That a lot of that's still in discussion at this point. but looking over a lot of options of that in post-secondary funding from the state to the colleges and universities. They have a pilot project on Pay It Forward, which is a student would not pay tuition to attend college and or university, but would pay like a garnishment of their wages for a time period, long-term period, maybe 25 years or so. And they have a committee looking at a pilot project for that, along with other ideas related to increasing student access to student aid and tapping resources that aren't tapped yet for scholarships and grants and loans. A few more things and I'll wrap up. I'm sorry, it's a 2-minute thing, but it was a really long list. High school to college transition, talking about, although deferring a little more to the OEIB on that, seeing as the OEIB covers all sectors, but that is a big topic of discussion and some of the things going on. But want to really make sure that should be coordinated and deferred to in the biggest sense to the OEIB. It seems to be the intention of the HEC. Looking at best practices in instruction and getting back to financial aid priorities for the Oregon Opportunity Grant, and the HEC has decided should be need-based rather than merit-based, but there's still a lot more to discuss based on getting that aid to students in the state. And like I said, they're expecting the OEIB to coordinate the high school to college transition, take the lead on it at least, and including curriculum alignment between the high school and college courses, for the transfer courses.
Is there any discussion about the Common Core at that point?
Not in the HEC, no, but I guess you're right. I mean, that's obviously would be the alignment with the new Common Core standards with the existing college entrance standards, so you're right. But they're expecting the OEIB to really take the lead on that too, so there has not been a lot of discussion ahead. And I think that wraps it up.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have more, we'll have information from superintendents that crosses over some of the topics you talked about. So we'll really listen for those places to link our work.
And hopefully, if I can just add, this afternoon's joint session of the OEIB and the HEC is a great opportunity for members of the OEIB to ask questions and ask for clarification on things.
Great, great point. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda for Early Learning Division update on the kindergarten assessment. We have Kara Williams and Brett Walker with us. Is Jonna coming today? Okay, please move forward.
Okay, well, good morning, Chair Curtis and committee. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today. I think we were already introduced, so I'll just move on into the presentation. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the kindergarten assessment and give you some updates. We've been before you before, and so we're going to start out just talking. I want to refresh your memory a little bit about what was included in the kindergarten assessment, the segments that are there, and then we'll move into a discussion about the statewide data that was just released. And then we can spend some time talking about some promising practices, some potential strategic investments, and then potential for expanded investment. So that's the thing today. Thank you. Okay. So if you remember, the kindergarten assessment has 3 segments. There's an early literacy segment, an early math segment, and an approaches to learning segment. The early literacy has 2 measures that all students take. It's English letter names and English letter sounds. It's gotten a lot of press recently, so I thought I would take this opportunity to kind of clarify some things about that particular assessment. So with English letter names and English letter sounds, the students view letters or letter blends on a chart. When we talk about when we look at the statewide results, we want to remember that we're not looking at how many letters out of 26 or how many sounds that the student could make, but we would be talking about how many they would name out of for letter names, it would be out of a potential 100. So on that chart, there's 100 letters. So of course, there's capital letters and small letters, and there's repeats. And we're looking at how many they can name within a minute, because we're talking about measuring fluency, which we know is very highly predictive of later reading outcomes. Letter sounds is the same way. They're looking at a chart that has 110 letters and letter blends. So we're not just talking about, do they have all of the 26 letters down? So I think that's important to talk about. The other measure that was included for literacy was Spanish syllable sounds. That was for Spanish-speaking English language learners only, and for this year there was a waiver in place for schools to use because it necessitates a fluent Spanish speaker. I would tell you that we had a lot of districts that chose to use that waiver this year, and I would also tell you that when looking at the data and hearing back from districts, we know that there were a lot of difficulties in administering that particular assessment. We're having some discussions about it. Those data were not released statewide. Those data were released back to those districts so that we can continue kind of working with the districts and having those conversations. But that's one area where we know we're going to need to have some future conversations. And so they were not available district-wide or statewide. The early math assessment is another one that's a direct assessment, meaning that the assessor sits directly across from the student. The student has a chance to practice on 2 items, and then there's 16 items, 1 item per page. Again, this is a really good opportunity to clarify this portion of the assessment is sometimes referred to as a paper pencil assessment, but the student never holds a pencil. It's actually the assessor that has the paper and the pencil and is marking down the student's answer. The student views each item and indicates their answer by pointing. So the student is not holding a pencil and filling in bubbles or anything like that. Then the third assessment is approaches to learning, and that's based on teacher observation. When we worked with assessors, this is one that teachers have to fill out, and when we worked with teachers, we told them to please complete that particular assessment towards the end of the 6-week window so that they had enough time to observe the student in the classroom during regular classroom activities and routines. This one does not necessitate any student time. This is really about the teacher watching that student and looking for looking at their interpersonal skills and also their self-regulation skills. So we'll go to the data. So with this first early literacy portion, you can see these are the statewide results. We had data that we disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and also by gender. I think it's important to point out to this group that we will also be able to make available a little later on in the year some other disaggregations, which include free and reduced lunch status and language. The reason that those will kind of come later in the year, we're anticipating September, is because districts submit those data later in the year. It's called third quarter ADM, and they have some time to submit those data, and then they have an opportunity to kind of clean up that information and double check and make sure that's the right information. So that information will be available to us in September as a look back, but I think it will be important for us to do that look back. In early literacy, you'll see that in letter names and letter sounds, the average for letter names was 18.5, but you can look further at the disaggregated data and see that one of the things that we can know from this assessment is that students are coming to school at very different levels. With letter names, it's important to point out that 33% of entering kindergartners could name 5 or fewer letters, and that 14% were not able to name 1 letter. With letter sounds, that number gets even larger. We had 37% of students statewide that were not able to identify a single letter sound in that 60-second time frame. With the math portion, if you get to look at this math portion, it's really nice to be able to see it on a bar graph because it has a more typical bell-shaped curve. We had on average students getting 8 out of 16 items correct statewide. 53% of the students were able to answer at least half of these questions. But again, you can look at the disaggregation and see that, again, we have students coming with various levels of ability in this area. And with the approaches to learning segment, again, I would reinforce the idea that this is based on teacher observation of the student. The teacher has the opportunity to look at 15 items that focus on self-regulation and interpersonal skills. And the teacher rates a student on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 would be never exhibits that skill, 5 would be always. So when you look at these numbers, these statewide averages, you would be looking at 3 means sometimes, and a 4 means frequently. So we're between a 3 and a 4. We have students who sometimes exhibit these skills to frequently exhibit these skills. About 25% of entering kindergartners did not regularly demonstrate these skills. And this is really critical for us to acknowledge because these particular areas have been very, very closely linked with future academic success. In fact, research is showing that they're more closely linked to future academic success than our measures in literacy and math. So the idea being that if you're not able to follow directions, cooperate with your peers, complete tasks, that's very difficult for you in your academic career and throughout life. It's very difficult. So we know that this is an area that we really need to focus on, and so that's where we're at there. I guess I'll pass it on to Brett to talk about what next.
Thanks. So one of the things that we wanted to do is share just a few examples of promising practices of how some communities around the state are already beginning to use the kindergarten assessment data. This is something that we're very much in the process of learning about. I'm sure that there are more examples than what you see up here right now, but these are a few that we know about where we know that strong collaborative working relationships between the early learning community and the K-12 community already exist. So in Gladstone, they've been able to use this first release of kindergarten assessment data to really strengthen an already strong relationship between early learning and K-12. And what they're doing is they're looking at kindergarten assessment data as a subset of all the data that they're already looking at together, which in itself it should be noted, early learning, K-12, sitting down together, looking at data of the students that they share, I think that we can say is a best practice in and of itself. What they've done that's really interesting in Gladstone, and this is an evolving process for them, is they are capturing in one place the types of early learning experiences that children have. They are exploring, looking at how to capture family characteristics, so things like income ranges and parents' educational attainment, which are obviously sensitive issues for school districts to be delving into, but those are the types of things that they're interested in learning about. And then looking at that side by side with the kindergarten assessment data, and then side by side with children's data on the DIBELS assessment throughout their kindergarten year. So they're really looking at the data in the context of this broader time and experience span, which I think is really important because, as we know, the kindergarten assessment is this one snapshot moment in time that measures some very specific skills. And what Gladstone is basically proposing is that if we use this data in conjunction with other sets of data that we have, this helps us understand trends, it helps us understand impact, it helps us understand potential hidden causes of why some of our children are coming into school maybe not as ready as we'd like them to be, and how we support them once they're there. So that's a really exciting piece of work. In McMinnville and Yamhill County, one of the things that we're seeing is similar. They're looking at how to use the data and share kindergarten assessment data across sectors. So what that means is having pre-K and K-12 at the table, but also their home visiting partners, their healthcare system, relief nurseries, childcare, the whole constellation of early learning services in collaboration with K-12. And really what they're doing that I think is so exciting is creating a sense of shared ownership around kindergarten readiness, so that the healthcare sector and the home visiting providers are beginning to shift thinking in ways that help them conceive of their jobs as preparing children to be ready to enter kindergarten. And that's a really important shift that's taking place at the local level. One of the things that Kara and I have been doing over the course of the last few weeks is working with the new early learning hubs to help them set performance targets related to kindergarten assessment data and kindergarten readiness. One of the uses for this data is to help us measure progress over time, and it's part of what early learning hubs are accountable for. So they've come to us and said, okay, we see this data here, we know we need to make improvements, where do we go from there? This is all brand new. So we've been having those conversations with them and helping them move through that process. And some of the things that we're seeing are there are really some promising practices kind of already in place. For example, in Grant and Harney County, which is called the Frontier Early Learning Hub in Eastern Oregon, so obviously very rural communities, very low population density in a large geographic area. One of the strategies that they've put in place is what they call preschool by mail. One of the roles of the early learning hubs is to find children and families and help them figure, and identify the services and supports that they need to make sure that children are ready for school. So instead of saying, travel 50 miles to get to this preschool program when your child is 4 years old so that they're ready, they said, we're going to get the curriculum to you and help you do it right in your own home. So that they're providing academic supports to families right at home, and it's simple, but potentially really powerful as well, and appropriate for the communities that they serve. Kara and I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to meet with the Lane County Early Learning Hub down in Eugene and surrounding areas, and what was so exciting when we sat down and met with them is they had questions for us about how do we set performance targets around this data that we've never seen before. But what was so exciting was they had already developed a really nice, comprehensive strategic plan focused on kindergarten readiness as a key outcome, which is all of the early learning hubs are doing this. But for them, it made perfect sense that yes, these are the strategies we've already put in place. This is the performance target that we're going to shoot for and to which we're going to hold ourselves accountable for. And for them, it was really just a matter of landing on the right number for the strategies that they've already identified for their communities. And that was really exciting to see that alignment between what we're trying to accomplish with kindergarten assessment, but then within the broader context of the redesign of the early learning system. So those are a few examples of what we're seeing. I think over time we're going to learn a lot more about what's happening in different communities, and we'll be able to also share, some of these promising practices as well. One of the other uses for kindergarten assessment data right now is how kindergarten assessment data and the broader concept of kindergarten readiness is interacting with some of the strategic investments that are in play right now at the state level. So we have 2 open requests for application right now through the Early Learning Division and the Early Learning Council. The Early Literacy Grant, which is part of the Oregon Early Reading Program, and the Early Learning Kindergarten Readiness Partnership and Innovation Program. And in both cases, we are using kindergarten assessment data both on the front end and the back end. And what I mean by that is we are asking or requiring applicants to look at their kindergarten assessment data and have a conversation at the local level about what does this mean, what does this tell us about our children's preparedness for kindergarten, and what do we need to be doing differently in the context of these 2 grants that we may be applying for that's going to help move the needle on that. And then on the back end, it's one of the most important outcomes that we're going to be looking at for both of those grant programs. So, and I think that one of the things that's really important here is that some of the feedback that we've heard around the early literacy measures is, well, you're looking at one very specific aspect of early literacy. It doesn't tell us everything about children's early literacy, which is certainly true. Kara, mentioned why it is that we're looking at that specific aspect because of its predictive nature. And in terms of the types of strategies and programs and activities that communities may engage in to move the needle in that specific area under the umbrella of the Early Literacy Grant, we're really promoting a comprehensive approach to early literacy. So in other words, we're not telling people through this early literacy grant, we want you to devise a program where you're showing flashcards to 4-year-olds so that they can perform well on their kindergarten assessment. What we're telling them is early literacy is it's a process that starts at birth or before birth, and we want to see families reading with their children. We want to improve the reading frequency, the quality of reading experiences that families and care providers are having with children, and that a lot of this is really about building capacity of adults to effectively understand what early literacy looks like. So that just a couple examples of how we're connecting kindergarten assessment with some of these strategic investments. And then the statewide reading campaign, of course, is a broader effort to raise awareness about the importance of early literacy across the state and literacy as a whole across the state. The kindergarten assessment data helps us know where we need to be targeting our efforts and with whom we need to be targeting our efforts and our messages in that campaign. In terms of areas for potential expanded investment, resource, et cetera, the first one, P3 alignment, or what Dr. Golden, you have called 3 to 3, this continuum. And under that heading, you see some of the key sub-areas that have been identified in the research as really important areas to be investing in. Not just investing dollars, but really investing time as well, and capacity building efforts as well. I think, from my perspective, I think that there's a lot that we can be doing to increase the level of community collaboration that's taking place between early learning and K through 3 as a subsystem of the K-12 system. And I also think that the opportunities for shared professional development and family engagement are really powerful. One of the other things, or one of the other components that we know is so important in this space is sharing, looking at, and being transparent about data, and just having people sit down together with data and look at it and take the blame game away and just say, this is what the data tell us, what do we do now? You're going to hear more about full day kindergarten as a bridge between pre-K and K3, but just wanted to put that up there as one of the important areas for continued investment as well. And then again, early literacy, and these are the things that I was just mentioning a few moments ago, building capacity, increasing access, and really looking at the broad scope of early literacy. We actually heard somebody that we were speaking with a group of pre-K providers and parents a couple weeks ago on a Saturday morning, and they had a lot of questions about the kindergarten assessment. And one of the people in the room, who was a preschool provider, I can't remember exactly in what context, but she stood up and said, the children who come out of my program, I believe, are ready for kindergarten, and we do that in the context of a play-based, developmentally appropriate pre-K setting. And it was really nice to hear that from somebody. And she said, I know that they're going to, do well on the kindergarten assessment, but that's not really what it's about. It's about making sure that they're really ready for kindergarten. And I think that she had a really nice perspective on looking at the kindergarten assessment as a snapshot, an important snapshot, something that gives us some important information, and also seeing the connection between the type of experience that she was giving children in her program and how that program prepared them for kindergarten readiness and being ready to go to school.
So these are just this is just an idea of the work that we have ahead of us. Of course, at this point we're preparing for 14-15 kindergarten assessment and some of the things that we need to do there. I won't belabor this slide, but things like providing training, doing some enhancement to data submission. One thing we heard from our kindergarten from school districts is please make this data submission process a little easier. And so we are really working on that and trying to refine it, trying to make it easier to capture those data and submit them. Reviewing and updating the accommodations, we still have some work to do there, making sure that children with special needs are able to access the assessment. Identifying some kindergarten assessment practices for Spanish-speaking English language learners. I think we still have some room to grow there and some work to do. So we're pulling together some experts and some panels. We're working with the equity unit at ODE and making sure that we're getting on that and having those conversations. Brett talked about the strategic investments, and then continuing to do ongoing stakeholder and community engagement. We kind of have a miniature roadshow that we're doing, but it's really important to connect with all of these areas. I think our next one is the PTA. It's really important to get out there and to hear this feedback, and it certainly does. We certainly do take it in and make adjustments and to keep this work moving forward. So I think that's kind of right for
Karen,
us.
thank you very much for continuing to keep us updated on what's going on. It's really exciting work, especially as you share with us about collaborations. I know that we asked Kay And I know it was also my responsibility to think about how we have this discussion with our committee. Kay, are you still on? Are you on the phone, Kay?
I had to turn it down because of the noise.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Go ahead, Kay.
Okay, I just asked you, Yvonne, to repeat the question. Sorry.
So we're ready to have a few minutes of a conversation with our subcommittee and looking specifically at the questions that get us to look at what are those best practices or investments we want to take forward to OEIB. And so are you ready to lead us in a conversation, or do you want me to jump in?
I would prefer that someone else start that conversation.
Okay. So I'm going to start with number 2 and just ask the committee. I identified some things myself. Obviously, the area that we're looking at, the addresses, the achievement compact, is the kindergarten readiness piece. So, Mark, go ahead.
I hope I don't pull this off of your intent to keep things compact. So if you rein me in.
Okay.
Okay. This is a feedback I've gotten a lot from the field, and the field meaning kindergarten teachers, principals, or early learning health folks. The fact that the KRA is really an end of the year, designed as an end of the year, more as a first grade readiness assessment. Heard a lot about that. But people are very interested in some sort of a component of a pre and a post. I know this wasn't designed along that line as a formative assessment, but that is what is coming from the field, that a lot of excitement about the KRA, a lot of appreciation that we're finally having this conversation, we finally have a measurement. Quite a lift to get to this point, it's pretty exciting. Now, how do we evolve that further? That's what I hear a lot, is this pre and post, which is a significant investment if we look down those lines. Another thing with the KRA that was just kind of hitting me as I was watching it, the final indicators are really educationally based, but the hub, the intent of the hub and early learning are the other sectors as well, health, safety. Has there been any discussion as future expansion of the KRA to have another indicator besides just the letter recognition and math? The self-regulation, I think, is great. But I'm thinking of buy-in from hubs and communities. They're still looking at the KRA as an educator. It's one.
So you're looking for the health indicators.
Health indicators, the safety indicators, you know. What they tell me is reduction of foster care, reduction of trauma in the home. But you see where I'm going with this? That if it's a kindergarten readiness assessment, it is very much an educational tool, yet the hub's education is only one part of the school.
Go ahead.
If I might just respond to that, I think a couple of things here. There was a real premium put, and correct me, jump in and correct me if I get this wrong. There was a real premium put on the KRA to be something that was concise and to acknowledge that we didn't want to add lots of stuff. That it needed to get key indicators, not all the indicators. And the key indicator, these two that we use in terms of the plays well with others and self-regulation, are the two biggest key indicators. In terms of they reflect many of those other things going on or not, including nutrition, health, stable family, etc. So I think the expectation from the Early Learning Council is that the hubs, the reason they're called hubs, is they will have access to, for example, the child welfare system data on kids and where they're located. So we've put a real premium on our results being client-specific, not just how many kids served over how many period of time, and being outcome-driven. So we actually know what happens with the child. So conceptually, a hub could have Sally, who would have a kindergarten readiness assessment, who would be, my hope, already identified by the healthcare system as potentially autistic, and already identified by the child welfare system as in their first foster home at 2 years old. That's all data that is all produced right now. It's available, it's not integrated, and it's particularly not integrated on a client level basis. And so I think we're trying to not overburden the KRA with that responsibility, that collection, sorting, et cetera, should come at the hub level. And we've put a lot of time and effort, not that we've got it perfected, into helping hubs build that capacity in at the outset. Because there are many pieces of the puzzle, including at the hospitals, legislation passed a decade ago, the ability to incorporate, for example, the first data that you have in the hospital that a child may be pre-autistic, et cetera. So I think your point is well taken, but again, on the basis of educators' recommendations, we have tried hard here not to make the kindergarten readiness assessment the hub. But the hub is the hub, and this is one of the key tools using two of the key behavioral indicators that will indicate down the line if there's an inability to be kindergarten ready.
That's a beautiful summary. That's something we need to message.
Okay?
Because if we can message that the third component of the KRA was designed along those lines, then there's going to be more buy-in. What I'm struggling with in our area, and I'm sure everybody is too, is the myriad of data, the myriad of indicators, myriad of databases, we know all this issue, and trying to get people to agree on a common set of outcomes so we can actually develop something to do, some strategies. The more we can get buy-in, and that's just what I was sharing, is if we could have that summary, then the health community can see, okay, the KRA does have we need to meet.
Right. And I think it's exciting that, you know, I don't think it's rocket science to take a certain number of key indicators for a child across the health, education, and family spectrum and not only project success or failure, but drive immediately what needs to be done to be sure that child is successful. It can become rocket science if we turn it into that. And one of my particular goals is to not turn it into rocket science, because we're better at rocket science than results here in Oregon, and we need to reverse that and get better at results than we are at rocket science. So that's our sharp focus at the Early Learning Council.
So I've identified or written that down in the notes as a recommendation. And the other thing that I just was going to add to that, and maybe it's just saying it in a different way, and that is just clarifying what you said in your summary about the self-regulation and interpersonal skills. I think even at the school district level, we don't yet really understand those indicators, why they were selected, the research behind them, and that they are indicating all of those things. So part of the message is more education for all of us around these measures, as well as the intent of the KRA. So I kind of wrote it down as the idea is messaging the difference between what was the intent of the KRA in terms of providing some high-level data in a concise way that covers all those areas versus the responsibility of the hubs for collecting data and drilling down into the other data you're talking about. Okay. Any other comments on that? Did you want to say one more thing?
No,
Then
sure.
we'll move us along. Okay.
It would be nice over time to see the correlations for grade rank. Our kids who are performing well, I mean, we can draw some conclusions, but I would love to see over time, like in 5 years, that there's alignment and we're improving the KRA enough that it aligns to smart balance. So we have a lot of moving parts here, but I ran some data. What I did is I broke down the data on a region of 3 indicators. All the school districts, all 19 going down one side, going across KRA, third grade reading, and high school graduation, 4-year cohort. And it was pretty compelling to see it across. But those aren't the same groups of kids.
Right.
Okay, we know that. So over time, in our database type idea with our investment is the KRA needs to integrate in some capacity with our future assessment measures.
I just want to underscore in that regard that the focus at the hub level is not, and this is the Achilles heel of getting to results. To get to that question, we need to track client level outcomes, not process outcomes. We're heavily biased towards process outcomes in our systems now. We're going to flip that at the Early Learning Council, and we're going to be very focused on that child with that KRA getting this intervention from the hub and it turning into third grade ready reading. But that's a really important distinction here because that's a change of culture. That's when we stop looking at lots of great data and start looking at moving the needle at the kid level.
So I'm just going to add that it's not just looking at the data, but it's also finding a way to keep track of the information. I know we've had these conversations with data warehouses and the longitudinal database, but I know there are systems, and the EasyCBM where this comes from is one of them, where you can actually input the interventions into the system so it can be tracked along with the data. I don't know if we're using that component with the KRA, but it is possible. So I think it's important for us to find a way to monitor that in a way that's also easy, concise, and readily available for everybody else. Hilda, you wanted to ask one more thing?
It's just that if there are any suggestions that you have around barriers that you run into around shared professional development for pre-K and K3, to forward those to us so that we can dig deeper into that. I know that we have a strategic investment that will be coming out soon, but we'd love to make sure that that's incorporated into that.
Great, thank you. I know we can take any one of these topics and keep talking, but I'm going to move us on. Mary Alice from McMinnville is here to share with us from the COSA has a work group that's focusing on full-day kindergarten, and she's going to share what their recommendations are at this point. And we'll use those same four guiding questions to try to point us to what are those clear recommendations we want to take to OEIB.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't have a PowerPoint for you, but you did receive a copy of our draft in your packet, so hopefully you have that in front of you. I can't tell you what an exciting time, and perhaps I don't need to tell you what an exciting time it is in education, because all of you are doing this very important work on this best practices panel and are well aware of the work that OEIB is trying to accomplish to move the governor's agenda forward in terms of 40-40-20 and making a difference for the kids in schools today so that they have great outcomes tomorrow. As a superintendent, I have this luxury of hosting my leadership meetings in any site in the district that I choose, and so we rotate our meetings around to buildings. And when we're having our meetings, we take a break at some point during the meeting, and we tour a particular program or a classroom. And so just yesterday, our break was spent in a kindergarten classroom. And in this kindergarten classroom, they were the teacher was working on students interacting with text. Now you can probably think of all kinds of ways kids might interact with text, particularly as you move to the secondary level. They might highlight text, they might write notes in the margin, they might write questions that they have on a notepad or on the page. But these kindergartners, it's pretty exciting because it happened to be a struggling group of students, and they had their short sentence picture book, each of them in front of them, and the thing I had to learn for the day was the symbol for question mark that kindergartners use in this class, because their interaction with text was to wonder and to wow. And so if you had a wonder about something in the picture, you did this. That stands for a question or a wonder. So this happened to have foxes in a den and bears in another den, and the wonder was, why did the bear have a bigger den than the fox? Okay, so and this other thing I had to learn, this other skill, was the wow. And the wow signal was this, which is an exclamation mark. So if I had a wow about something in the story that was either read by the teacher or that I saw, I would be able to put this up and then draw a picture about what I thought that wow was. So we can even have students as young as kindergarten and probably before interacting with text in a very developmentally and appropriate way, but causing them to think about the materials in front of them in a way that maybe might not otherwise have taught them if we weren't intentionally helping students develop their early literacy skills in an effort to make sure all students can read by grade 3s. Really critical, but also pretty exciting to watch, and in a fun, development appropriate way. Those kids were all smiling, they were all laughing, and they were trying to teach me how to get the curve in my wrist, which I was struggling with for a little bit initially, because this particular lesson I hadn't observed before. I had an opportunity to do a visitation in Washington a week ago. And the reason I was doing visitations in Washington had to do with some facility designs. And in our particular district, we're looking at making some improvements to some programs at the end of our spectrum, and that other end of the spectrum dealing with career to college readiness programs and expanding some of the things we're doing, but needing a facility. And when I visited these different sites that just had these really great facilities in place, I asked them in each case in Washington how they were able to fund them. And in each case, they told me the story of, well, their process in their state, which is just across the river, just an hour and 15 minutes from McMinnville, in their state, they submitted an application to the state, and if the application is approved, they receive funding to build their facility. And I continue to be in envy of that particular process, because when we had to open a new elementary school in 2005, that had to be preceded by a bond campaign and a whole lot of work that wasn't directly related to instruction, but in order to get the voters to vote yes. And every year we know that some districts are fortunate enough to pass their bond and other districts are not. And why do I bring that up to you today? Because I'm here on behalf of OEIB, the Oregon Association of School Executives, to advocate for full-day kindergarten programs in 2015. But one of the barriers that many of our superintendents face about 2015 implementation year for full-day K is adequate facility space and actually to be able to double their classrooms for kindergarten. So for example, if they're offering a half-day program today, and perhaps they have 3 sections in 2 classrooms, so an AM session in one classroom, a PM session in that same classroom, and an AM session in the second classroom, they're a classroom short to double. Does that make sense? So if they were to increase the full day, they now need another classroom in order to be able to make all three of those sections a full day in a room. And without additional funding at the state level provided by the state to accommodate facility needs for those districts who need it, we're going to have some inequities across our state in the implementation of full day K, because perhaps school districts will not have adequate space to provide that program for them. I'm here to say to you that we believe full day K is critical to bridge the gap, as we heard earlier, between pre-K and grade 3. We think that one of the barriers our students face is the lack of time in quality programs, and for many people it's an affordability issue. And so if we can increase the time students have to engage in appropriate development and learning opportunities by doubling the time kids happen to have in kindergarten, and on top of increasing the time barrier, improving the quality of instruction that students receive in a full-day kindergarten program, then we think we can make great gains in the state. And so I'm also here to advocate that you as a best practice committee can help us through the larger OEIB team, and hopefully with legislators and other policy and decision makers, by saying it's really critical that we fund districts to staff full-day kindergarten programs. So in my district, I think I have 12 and a half sections of half-time kindergarten. For me, that would be a double, so I need another 12 and a half sections of half-time kindergarten. And I need additional money to pay additional staff positions in order to pull that off. And I can't take that money from the other programs that I have in place, because we're making great gains in those other programs by the various resources we've allocated to them today. You know, we're really lucky in McMinnville. We happen to have really high college credit earning for students while in high school. We happen to be increasing our rates of students and persistency when they leave us. And it's all about how we're giving those resources that we have today, again, to help kids be successful tomorrow. And for us to be successful, to fully operate a full-day K, that additional funding is needed. So those are sort of 2 big umbrella ideas I would like you to think about. And if you could help us help you figure out how to help us by providing the funding for facilities and providing the funding for additional FTE, I would be happy to do whatever it takes as a superintendent in Oregon and with our OASE team to help facilitate that process. In the handout that you have from us on page 1, you'll see that our committee has 4 primary recommendations. The primary recommendations are to ensure equity for Oregon students. All Oregon school districts should implement full-day kindergarten in 2015-16. To add an additional $218 million above the 13-15 state school fund roll-up costs in order to pay for the additional FTE. That an additional fund should be established to assist districts with one-time costs associated with full-day kindergarten implementation, such as capital construction. You see that we've indicated an early number of 14 million, but we've been working with Brian Reeder out of the Department of Ed to fine-tune these numbers. We actually think it's going to be closer to 20 million in order to accommodate those classroom needs for districts who have facility issues. So recognize this is a draft report, and within the next several weeks, we anticipate finalizing our report and making sure that our numbers align with the data that's coming out of the Department of Education. And that we also think funding ought to be provided for various groups to work in partnership to provide quality staff development for not only kindergarten teachers, but pre-K teachers, and I will speak to that pre-K component in just a moment. Because having a half-time program move to a full-time program, that time element is critical, but it's more than just doing half-time kindergarten twice. You actually have an opportunity that you can spend in depth on a particular topic, helping students develop their literacy or numeracy skills, as well as other things that were measured by the KRA, for example, like self-regulation. I want to show you the back page of the document, and it's the very last page, and it's referred to as an appendix. And it was our early work at pulling together the kindergarten readiness assessment data. And just look at those charts at the bottom. Now, the tall bars are what was possible on each one of those assessments. It doesn't mean that we're recommending that very top point is the bar that should be expected of all students when they come into kindergarten. But it has, as Brett indicated, created great opportunity for those of us in the field to have conversations with our early learning providers about could we do more? Could we do better? Could we have that small bar a little bit higher by next year if we intentionally focused on some things like letter identification and letter sounds and numeracy? And we think it's a great place that allows us to come together, not only in these hubs, but as everyone who cares about the future of our children is saying we can do some things differently. Here's where it hit home for us in our district a few years ago, even before the KRA came out. We were having a conversation about what I personally thought were particularly low expectations for our kindergarten students in those schools. I couldn't believe our expectations. I thought that we were crazy to have so little that we would want from our students. One of our principals at that time had a child who was just entering kindergarten. And I asked that principal, how many letters does your child know? All the letters. Lowercase, uppercase. I mean, it's coincidental that this assessment came out 3 years later. Yeah, pretty much. How about sounds? Do they know any sounds? Well, I think they know most of their sounds. I haven't tested him, but I think he knows most of his sounds. How about numbers? Any number? Yeah. So then we returned to our conversation about, by the end of kindergarten, we were only expecting students to know 10 letters some years ago. Is that okay? And it fostered itself by this expectation, well, some kids are just going to have that as their outcomes because they don't have those other parental supports in place at home or the resources. And again, we asked the question, is that okay? And we came to the conclusion that it's really not, and it's a matter of will, and it's a matter of belief, and it's a matter of time, and it's a matter of money. Those four things together that can help us move the dial for all kids in Oregon. I want to draw your attention to just a couple of other things in our report. You'll note that on page 3, we talk about how full-day kindergarten can lead to higher academic achievement. We believe that it supports literacy and language development. We believe that students who begin a good record of success in kindergarten are going to have better attendance, and we know that's one of your measures and outcomes that you're looking at to gauge student success as they go through the years. On page 4, we've begun to play with a draft of what a high-quality full-day kindergarten components might include. We know this is not comprehensive enough yet, and are continuing to work and remodel it, and we show a sample full-day as compared to a half-day program. Again, we want to emphasize the fact that it's about quality as well as quantity. One of the things that is a barrier in K-12 system today is time. Oregon, as you know, has one of the shortest school years in the country. And I am always in a race for time for our students. We've just cobbled together some money, for example, to do a summer school program which will extend learning for some of our students in the district. I can't extend it for 100% because the funding is limited. But we can do time by extended day programs, before school programs, lengthening the school year, and where we have an opportunity actually lengthening the school day, and we have a chance to make that fix for kindergarten students as we move into Oregon. I want to draw your attention, if I could, to page, let's see here. page 8. And I do want to also sort of lay a little foundational concept moving forward, as I'm sure many of you have wrestled with well before me ever coming to this meeting. But some of you know, because you've heard me advocate loud and clear, that in addition to full day K, I hope the state will consider pursuing preschool programs on a universal level for students. In the box on the right-hand side, it shows a recommendation from this group, which of course is still in the draft stage. But it suggests perhaps that in 15-16, as I've already discussed, the state embrace full day K, funding full day K, and that in the next biennium, we take a look at universal preschool for four-year-old students. And that I hope we can be thinking about that as an OEIB best practice committee. And it's not about schools taking over preschool or replacing quality programs that already exist. It's about access for all students, increasing our access for all students to high-quality pre-K schools, pre-K experiences. So for example, in our community, we have a number of students who benefit from a Head Start program that is improving every day, and we're working very closely with our Head Start providers. But our Head Start providers cannot meet the needs of the number of students that really do not have any other alternative for a preschool experience. They would love to, but they can't. Their funding, numbers, facilities are limited. On the other end, we have some really neat preschool programs that are provided by private providers, and they're doing a great job with those students in developmentally appropriate practices and helping them prepare and be ready for school. And we have a whole array of parents who enjoy the luxury that I enjoyed when I was a little kid growing up. I had a stay-at-home mom, and she was able to help me have all kinds of learning experiences and opportunities and see the world and understand vocabulary and all that sort of stuff. Well, there's this group of kids who also have one or more parent who are able to provide that in the home setting and may not necessarily need to move into a pre-K program. But there's this vast number of students within our community that without the state providing some funding for a universal pre-K program, they're really starting the school far, far behind. And as you've kind of heard these comparisons over and over, I can't help, because I have the microphone, to sort of say it again. That, you know, we all have a race to run, a race that gets us to some finish line. And in today's world, the finish line has been 12th grade. Tomorrow's world, the finish line is expected to be a post-secondary experience or a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree. And the idea is for that to happen all within contiguous periods of time if possible, because students don't continue on. We lose them along the way, and many never return. So if we're all starting the race from the same finish line, we are going to all get to that, from the same starting line, we're all going to get to the finish line at some point in time. Some of us are going to get a little faster, and some of us are going to get a little slower. But we all only have to run the same distance. Maybe it's a 100-meter race, maybe it's a 200-meter race. We just all have to run the same distance. But with a number of our kids who come to us without exposure to language skills, without exposure to numeracy, without opportunities to have vocabulary, visual experiences, world experiences, that starting line for them is somewhere way back here. And they have to cover a greater distance from the day they enter school until the day they exit. They have to do it faster at a pace that is double or more than their counterparts who already came ready. And so I know that may be a tired analogy or way to think about it, but we have this time in Oregon. I think this time is different than we've had in so many of our past years, where we have a collective group saying, we can do this for the children and we can change the outcomes by 2025. We change the outcomes by that date by really changing each of the outcomes today. One important measure for changing the outcomes are giving students quality learning experiences at the earliest age possible. We can do that by doubling time that students have in kindergarten, improving the quality of that time while they're in kindergarten, making sure there's robust professional development, and we can do so as soon as 2015. So you've heard me advocate for a variety of those things. We want to work in partnership with our early learning providers to do it the best way possible, but we also want to make sure that the Best Practices Committee can advocate for these actions, in turn that the larger OEIB group can do so, and hopefully legislators and everyone in the state of Oregon. About our process, group of superintendents meeting on these issues. You'll hear from Shelley in a little bit about another topic that our superintendents are focusing on, because we care about changing those outcomes. We want to invest our time and thought in what we think is best for Oregon students. Oklahoma has a great model for a preschool program and full-day K. There are a number of other places that do. We even visit them with you if you like, because we're pretty excited about what we see. But anything we can do to help you, help this target move forward, we will assist. So,
Thank you, Mary Ann. So if you just stay for a few minutes,
Sure.
I'd like to turn to the committee and say, are there some things that you heard that, clearly we heard the advocacy for additional funding and you're giving us very specific numbers. I'd like to draw our attention to the question number 3 about, do we hear any places where we can leverage existing resources to help in terms of best practice way? You mentioned the work with the early learning hubs and getting information out to families. I'm wondering from the committee if there are some others in addition to the advocacy for funding. What other things are you thinking?
Well,
Chair Curtis, this is Carrie. Along with that question, I have a question. Does the committee or work group ever consider a recommendation, since the GOT agreements at full-day kindergartens are definitely appropriate and we should pursue that, but if we don't have the revenue, is there a recommendation from the work group what a next step might be rather than a full-day kindergarten without the revenue to support that?
we have a legislative mandate for it. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's been passed by the legislature for full-day kindergarten, fall of 2015. 16, excuse me. And so,
So is that, Mark, are you answering her question?
yeah, I guess what is a little different, I agree with what Kay is saying, but what's a little bit different here for this group of people is we already have it's already passed for all-day kindergarten rather than a recommendation. You see what it's a different nuance.
Yeah. Nancy, did you want to add something?
Well, I think one thing that's important to review is just how do these individual recommendations move through our processes, because I know I love the work of everyone, and I just want to be honest that the level of recommendations we're having people ask us for are moving into, you see here this is 218 million, and I know it's different, but close to getting to $1 billion, and of course we want to make sure we get money out to our institutions to do the main work, because this is a tight, loose, get it done out there. So we'll take all of these recommendations, and working with the Outcome and Investment Committee, we're going to then work with the process of the governors. We work with the governor's staff to make recommendations to the governor's budget, and of course then he will present a budget that will go to legislators, and legislators will decide on the end budget. So, I think the mandate around all-day kindergarten was there's a choice of doing all-day kindergarten in 2016. I think in moving it through the legislative session, there was never an absolute commitment to additional resource. That's what's happening here, is the belief that we don't want to take this from the same pot of money, and that would just move into the process along with everything else. I think, and if I hear Kay, I don't think there's anyone who would say universal preschool isn't important. It's when you take the cost of that and knowing that the pot's only so big and you have to balance it against all of the other targets on the achievement compacts and all the other needs, does that emerge? And the problem is when we're in these committees, we're only seeing a slice of the process. And so we're just going to have to zigzag back and forth through the OEIB and subcommittees.
Absolutely.
May I just clarify on some dates? 15, 17 is the biennium. We are recommending full-day K funding. And then sometime after the next biennium, perhaps beginning in 17 would be the preschool. But for this coming biennium, 2015-17, and my understanding is 2015-16 school year would be the first year for full-day K.
Mark?
The work that this group has done, they've been at this for a long, long time, and it's really well done. The facilities piece is huge. I'm just going to put these two things out there, that are on my head there that I've heard. The facilities is gigantic. The second thing is teacher quality. what are we going to hire in our current system, this many highly qualified kindergarten teachers? I mean, you just think about it, well, how is the restructuring going to play out? How are the hirings? These aren't going to be all first-year teachers coming into all the kindergarten. So this teacher quality component, I just want to put it out there that we know the #1 indicator for increase in achievement is teacher quality. And if we move in this direction as a state, I haven't seen a concerted plan for the preparation of teacher quality for all day kindergarten.
So I do see a recommendation on here that the OASC group work with OEE and other groups around what does the professional development look like. Perhaps we can recommend that the idea about how hiring happens and how we make sure it's not just brand new teachers going into kindergarten, but that there's some integration would be pieces we could integrate into probably that piece. And then I would just encourage the committee to continue to think about what we do on that #3 about how do we help leverage the work that's already been done. One of them is that last recommendation you made about working with those other groups. But I would encourage the committee to continue to think about ways we can talk about that with best practice. If there's any other areas in addition to what you've requested that we can leverage the relationships at this point, especially with early learning. Lynn? And then,
So first, I want to thank you for your work. I've had the privilege of being in the McMinnville schools during the school day and watching everything, and so I commend you on an exceptional school district. I just want to put two things on the table that will frame my perspective on recommendations to the OEIB. First of all, as I look at your definition of high-quality, full-day kindergarten, and I certainly agree that that looks like a robust curriculum, that is a curriculum that needs to, I think, would benefit from being broken down as to what can be done by paraprofessionals and what can be done by teachers. Certainly not all of it needs to be done by full baccalaureate degree teachers. Much of it could be done effectively by paraprofessionals taught at places like Portland Community College. Secondly, I think that the question that we have to ask ourselves collectively with the dollars is there will not be enough dollars to do what we want to do with education in Oregon. I start from that position every single time. And so part of the challenge here is to say, how do we get to full-day kindergarten within the resources that we have, which may preclude the buildings entirely. We have a lot of buildings in this state that are underutilized and very expensive and on the state operating budget. So I would encourage us, again, as Nancy suggested, not to look at every discrete part, but to look at the whole part and to challenge each level, including the early learning level, but also the K through 3 level. Here's the money you have. Come with a proposal to get us the results with the money you have, and think very creatively and beyond the limits of kind of the last 10 years of how we can get this done. One of the things I would suggest is the most obvious is this, which we have not had prior as a product of the Oregon kindergarten system. This didn't exist. Lots of things had to happen differently because this didn't exist. This makes buildings a little less important. And so I just want us to think differently. I want us to think within the frames of our resources. And finally, and I know the Early Learning Council is very committed to this work, there is an urgency here that requires a guerrilla, GUE type thinking in terms of the outcomes we're trying to get in the time frame that we have. So this is a little bit, in my mind, an effort that is analogous to the Franklin Roosevelt's WPA program. We have a crisis. We have to respond quickly. There are lots of things that are important to do but need to be set aside in the quest for results. And I think we've got to have a more, and I think some of the seeds of that are in your document here, but money cannot be our frame. It has to be one of the things on the table for discussion, but the results have to be the frame, and how we get there differently than we have in the past has to be our focus.
thank you. I wrote that down as another recommendation. I know one of the other work groups is working on the whole digital conversion piece, and I've been a part of that work and know that there might be an opportunity to better describe that in terms of how we utilize technology integration as we sort of scale up with the full-day kindergarten. So, thank you. Yes.
Just a couple closing comments.
Sure.
And really responding to many of the comments made already here, but in that same kindergarten class I was in yesterday, we had another group using their iPads. And with their iPads, they were doing language literacy and math literacy. And they are great. And I sat with that population of students, and they were teaching me how to use those particular apps because I couldn't. And so technology is a great gift. It's a great gift for our early learners. It's a great gift for all students, and even students who have had some cognitive challenges in communicating before. We're finding those devices opening a whole new world. So we do think we can add that component to our proposal. In terms of facilities and other buildings available, I would agree. I think there are other entities, other organizations. I was at a large campus not long ago, and I won't name the name of that campus, but I was looking around saying, wow, if I had this space, there are some things I could do. And so if you, as a barrier buster group, can help us work with other organizations that they can allow K-12 to use some of those facilities for these kinds of programs, it would be certainly value added and would not have such a high demand at the state level to offset that funding. And I also want you to know that I agree there's a significant role that paraprofessionals can provide, which can lessen the overall cost on the FTE requirement, knowing that I think we need a combination of both, not necessarily one or the other. And while funding cannot be the frame, I absolutely agree, we have to move mountains every day without enough money to do it. And I think our schools, by and large, work really hard at that across Oregon. I do have to say there would be some money that's needed, and that we hope we can look for additional revenue in support of this early learning effort. But I really appreciate all your work, and we'll add some things to our report with some of your input and recommendations, and very happy to receive your feedback over time. So thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to come. We're going to move to Shelley Berman, who will be here to share from the work group that's, pardon me? Oh, and Craig Hawkins is coming as well, too, to share re-imaging grades 9 through 14. Again, I'm going to ask the committee to be thinking about those areas where we're really trying to hone in on where will the recommendations be. We are about half an hour behind, and all these conversations are really important, so we're just going to get through.
We're going to be short.
Pardon me? You're going to be short? Great.
There's 2 different
Members, you were sent this copy this morning. There were some late additions that were made that Shelley sent to us, but this is your hard copy.
Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm Craig Hawkins with COSA, and Shelley asked me to join him for just a moment. As we've mentioned a few times this morning, we have 4 superintendent work groups going on in our organization, trying to bring forward some thinking around some key areas. And in particular, we focused on the two transition points with K-12. So you just heard from Mary Alice, who's one of the co-chairs of about a 25 or 30 member work group that's been going through early learning. Shelley's work group, Shelley and Candy Armstrong from North Wasco are the 2 co-chairs. There are about 35 members of the Reimagining Grades 9 to 14 work group, and they've been meeting for about 6 months. But for about a year prior to that, we met as a group of superintendents with a group of community college presidents and really started this conversation. And so if you looked at Shelley's 35-member work group, it includes community college presidents and others, some higher ed folks, high school principals, et cetera. So to give you a flavor of where these recommendations are coming from, yes, they're coming from superintendents, but it's broader than that. I think I'll stop there since we're trying to be brief.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share the work. Excuse me, I'm a little bit hoarse. I'm just getting over a cold. First of all, I want you to know that what I've handed out is still a draft. It may remain a draft for a while as we continue to refine it and get input from community college presidents, university leaders, and to continue to have a dialogue among our own membership to ensure that we're really being as accurate and as precise as possible. What I'd like to do is keep this somewhat simple. The paper is not simple. It is pretty complex and there's a lot of detail in it. But I want to try to stay at a pretty high level and do this pretty succinctly so that we can have a dialogue back and forth about it. Our intent in reimagining grades 9 and 14 was to simply say that if we're going to get to the 40-40-20 goal, we have to really rethink high school and community college and university education in a way that no longer looks at us as silos, but looks at us as one blended system, where students move smoothly from one level to another, where there aren't barriers to that movement. And so how do we create that kind of blended system? And as we began talking about it and expanded, we encountered what we would say is sort of 7 barriers. Now we've reframed this as barriers in the spirit, the Nancy Golden spirit of barrier buster, since she said she is the barrier buster, moving barriers out of the way so that we can accomplish the work that we need. And the OEIB is as an organization a barrier buster. So I've framed it in that context. And what we see is these are not necessarily individual barriers, but actually barriers that are together in many ways or overlap in many ways. And you'll see it as I go through this. So the first one that we found is that our high schools don't consistently provide preparation essential for post-secondary education. In essence, we've been moving to the Common Core standards, but we've also come to understand much more deeply what college and career readiness means. And it means much more than just simply academic content standards and understanding the knowledge that's required to move into college courses. There are a lot of contextual skills, there are conceptual awareness of what college life is like, college knowledge, a whole variety of expectations that are much more rigorous and much deeper and sometimes reflect on individual attitudes and personalities of students. And the cultivation of an orientation towards rigor and persistence. So in fact, one of the things we're recommending to address that is literally to take some time and look at how we align our expectations in high school to those expectations at community college or university level. And not only in the content areas, but also in areas of other conceptual skills. Second barrier is that, and I think you're well aware of this, that there's some barriers around dual enrollment courses, that it's challenging for our teachers to become certified. We have some high-quality teachers who have a master's in teaching, maybe not a master's in a specific content area, yet that presents a barrier. They may have content courses at a graduate level, but they don't have sufficient courses to actually qualify for teaching at those dual enrollment classes. We believe that, and the state board actually presented or approved a more flexible guideline for community colleges, yet there's still a lack of consistency among community colleges. And the recommendation here is that through the OEIB or through our work with community colleges and higher education coordinating committee, there is some collective effort to bring consistency across the expectations that enable us to expand dual enrollment courses. A third barrier is one around the career technical education. As you, I think, are well aware, many of us have abandoned, for the most part, pathways, career technical education pathways in our high schools. I know in Eugene, I have a number of woodworking courses, probably a metals course somewhere, but very few of those are aligned to the programs in the community college that actually end up with certifications. And so, how do we strengthen that? Well, there are a number of strategies we've recommended, but one is that we improve our own certification processes around CTE certification. That's partially to look at how can we improve our own programs. For example, in Eugene, we're looking at an engineering program and getting the certifications for our teachers to teach engineering. Actually, there's some really high-quality math and science teachers who great deal of experience with engineering and physics, but it is very challenging to not only get their certification as CTE instructors, but also getting program certification taking an extended period of time. So how do we facilitate the being more efficient about that certification and bringing TSPC and ODE and our ESDs, which actually take care in many cases of the process, together in a streamlined way so that we can actually be more effective. A fourth barrier, and this is one that is strikingly unusual in the sense of, I think it is more characteristic of Oregon than other places. That is that we found that, and I found coming to Eugene, that our students, particularly our juniors and seniors, are not necessarily fully scheduled. In fact, what in the research that we've done among our districts, that our students are scheduled about 85% of the time, meaning that if you have a 7-period day, many of our students are scheduled for 6 instead of 7. If you have 8 courses in a year, some may be scheduled for 6 or 7. That not only limits their ability to progress on time if they fail a course, but it also reduces the rigor of the experience of high school. One of the things that we've talked about here is that, and recommended in order to provide that kind of rigor and that kind of experience, is to actually look at not just a full schedule in high school, but a full program. That if we can create full programs for our 11th and 12th graders, that might include dual enrollment classes, classes at universities, online courses, things that actually, or apprenticeships and internships, things that are rigorous and begin building their schedule so that when they move on to post-secondary education, they're well equipped to perform well at that level. A fifth barrier that we have confronted is the barrier, and you're going to hear more about this in just a couple of minutes, and that's around developmental education. Nationally, developmental ed at the university level, community college, and university level has not been highly successful. I was looking at the Education Northwest report that you're going to be hearing about shortly, and that over a short period of time, from 2005 to 2010, the percent of students going to community college who require developmental education skyrocketed from 47% to 67%. 67% of our students entering community college needing developmental ed is a pretty significant barrier, particularly when those courses often, and actually the success rate in those courses often don't lead to students being able to be successful in credit-bearing college classes. So how do we address that? And what we're recommending here is that we in high schools take some responsibility for that. That we actually use the Smarter Balance Assessment as a placement test. That we re-administer something and have another test at the end of senior year, that the universities and community colleges use our results on Smarter Balance as an indicator of that placement. Right now, not only do the community colleges have different placement tests, there's more consistency in reading and literacy than there is in math, but some of our universities and our community colleges actually create their own math assessment, for example. I know that in my own area, both Lane and University of Oregon have independent math assessments developed by their department. They'll use AccuPlacer or Compass, which are the standardized instruments. So somehow we have to build in consistency and build that in early enough so that we're able to use that senior year to address those developmental needs so that students are, when they move on to community college and universities, are well prepared. The sixth barrier is one that we think is more long, sixth and seventh are more long-term, but in fact, you're working on these already. We need a data system and a monitoring system that builds mutual accountability. And I think your targets, the OEIB has already targeted the outcomes of graduation from community college and university as key targets for higher education, as well as graduation from high school. So how do we build in a cohesive system that actually tracks different pathways and gives us information about the success of students moving through, for example, fifth-year programs in a community college that are sponsored by high schools where students are in a community college, and then moving them on to the university level and four-year universities. Is that a successful pathway? And what are our barriers, and how do we learn about the barriers within that and overcome those barriers? So essentially, we need to have a data system, an accountability system that brings us together and not pulls us apart. And then the final one is that we see that for many families, and particularly for historically underserved groups and families, post-secondary education is often seen as a distant hope. It isn't seen as accessible. And so both at a community level and at a state level, we need to have in essence, a public relations campaign, a personalized public relations campaign that helps provide actionable information to these families so that they can not only see that post-secondary education is accessible to them, but that they have the skills and the tools to be able to complete forms like the FAFSA form, which is, if any of you completed it, it's an extraordinarily challenging form, even for someone with a college education, let alone somebody who sees university as a distant hope. So those are the 7. I've really been brief because I know that you have very limited time and you have much to do. But overall, what we're saying is that these are merged together in essence in a couple of ways. And the primary recommendation we would be making is one, to actually put forward, just as the OEIB put forward strategic investments, that this become one of those strategic investments. We begin looking at key areas like you have for the regional achievement compacts to see if we can pursue some of these in a cohesive way, where we are, for example, piloting a fully scheduled program in areas and having universities and community colleges and school districts partner in a way that moves student schedules forward and fills their schedule, where we are looking at consistency across the state around, or even in a region around the placement tests that are used and our work in developmental education. So that's the broad perspective. We have been concretizing with some figures, but I think at this point, I'd just rather open it up to conversation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your format here with the barriers and solutions as we are taking our role, as Nancy's given us, barrier busters very seriously. And I'm going to apologize for the side talking with Hilda. There's a lot here, and I know there's a lot of work going on. So we're trying to figure out how do we actually identify where these things are actually going to get done. And so I'm going to ask Hilda really quickly to talk about some of the other places where this work is getting done, and then I think I have a recommendation for some members of our committee to work with you and with Hilda to figure out, I think what we'd like to ultimately identify as a best practice committee is where do we need to make recommendations as an OEIB, where is it already getting done? And the 2 words that came to my mind, which actually I'm kind of stealing from Mary Alice Russell, and it's about the idea of will. And right now we're working with the willing, and there's a lot of political will, but there are also some policies and some key investments already in place that are encouraging some of this work. And at some point, I know in working with the willing, you go so far with the willing, and then there's got to be a way to get it in policy or put some other oomph behind it to actually get it the rest of the way there. And I guess that's what I would like to see all of the groups who are working on this identify, is not only what are the possible solutions, but just boldly calling out, where are we stuck in actually moving everybody there. So Hilda, will you share the other groups that are working on some of these?
So I've shared some of this in a document with those of you who've been attending these meetings, and I think what we're referencing is that some of these same items are surfacing in the work of the Accelerated Learning Committee. We are also working in parallel with the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission Student Success Group. I'm actually working with them tomorrow, and tomorrow afternoon the Accelerated Learning Committee is meeting, and they too will be taking a look at these barriers and fitting that work into the work that they have already done. I will just share though that there are some efforts underway that are not necessarily causing additional strategic investments at this time, but that are getting clarity around some of these alignment issues. So for example, there is a Porter College grant that we received that engages a number of folks from community colleges and school districts and the state level, looking at particularly the alignment that we could do as we begin to look at college career readiness definitions, which is on the agenda for consideration by the OEIB today, and looking at where we look at predictions on the scores that students may be able to achieve on a smarter balance, looking at how that should align with placement practices in the colleges. So I'm engaging with a lot of different folks around this conversation that as we move forward and get better understanding of what the first round of SBAC tells us, we're going to be able to probably give you some information around, okay, if a student scores 4, what should that mean in terms of placement if the student stays on track and continues to take advanced coursework. So that's number 1. Number 2, Nancy and I have had many conversations about this. We are equally frustrated about the certification issues, and you posed some very good ideas. We've also prepared some documents to share tomorrow with the Accelerated Learning Committee that looks at policies from other states that have been able to reach a little bit better alignment. We're also really going to reach out, probably as a result of a recommendation from tomorrow, to our Oregon Community College Association to really bring together some possibilities around what about if we created an equivalency chart, what other means, innovative means do we have of clearing this. This one seems like an adult problem that we should be able to fix. Nancy's even charged me with going all the way to our legislators in DC and impacting the regional accreditation agencies. So these jobs are big. And number 5, I just want to point out again that that is tied in with this work with Porter College, and you've already identified that number 6 with longitudinal data system is there. We also have been able to reserve some funds through a grant that we would be looking at a communication and messaging package on the number 7 here, because we really do feel that students, their families, employers, everyone needs to understand the impact of this.
So David.
Yeah, if I can just add a few things.
Yes.
Actually, I think Hilda mentioned some good points there. I'm really impressed by the report. I think especially a lot of how it works for a mutual kind of aligning of goals between the colleges and the high schools. I think that's really important, and it's reflected a lot in the report. And I think a lot of things like the 5th year and the transitional programs and such are pretty recognized as being successful throughout the state where they are happening, if not enough. I would just like to point out one thing, since it's a reported progress, that I've heard a lot of concern from college faculty throughout the state on item number 2 about trying to increase the dual enrollment offerings, that there's a concern that if the teacher qualifications are not taken seriously enough, that the credit those students are gaining through their dual enrollment program, if it's not a rigorous and full, something that's aligned with college curriculum, there's a worry, there's a concern there that we'll be offering these students college credit that is really less than college credit. So I'd like that to be, sometimes I think in Oregon we get, the money's not there, the funding's not there, and we're looking for solutions, but I'd like to make sure that those solutions maintain the rigor of a college course. And I think also something that could be included there is working with the colleges, particularly the community colleges, more to offer their faculty, and it was mentioned in there that they're doing that in many community colleges already, but expanding their faculty offerings in dual enrollment and reaching out to the high schools. And I know we've kind of talked with Mark before in this committee about maybe there's a way that's somewhat similar like to the 5th year, although not a 5th year, something that's more a 3rd or 4th year of high school doing dual enrollment, but to have a community college instructor teaming up with the high school instructor, and the high school instructor offering some of the things you mentioned are offered in the 5th year, which is more counseling, tutoring, assistance, and the community college instructor offering that course, particularly maybe in a rural environment with maybe doing that through distance learning or something like that. So I think that's something maybe could be looked more into, and that is a concern I'm hearing from a lot of college faculty throughout the state.
In fact, we did write that in In the most recent version, I tried to add a couple of lines about that particular issue, so thank you for that.
I got that before my morning cup of coffee,
Did
so
you?
excuse me, I haven't read the latest version. I'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Great comments, Mike. Mark?
Now, obviously, a lot of us have been at this for a long time, and I think this is really nice on paper, seeing what these are, but just a couple thoughts that don't cost any money at all that are woven throughout here. Proficiency. I would love to see in these docs that called out more clearly. Proficiency to me means we look at what the standards are we want the student to learn, which is going to be the Common Core, which is going to change what Algebra 2/Math 95 really is. We develop the rigor within that proficiency, and we develop the assessments. And if we can start moving in that way of thinking, then a lot of these other factors like lack of rigor, schedules, all these things come with it. But I would love to see as we move forward with any of these 9 to 14 conversations, we embed proficiency.
So Mark, I also heard you mention Common Core, and I guess in our region, I've just been even wondering what colleges are thinking about Common Core. Has there been an embracing of, that is, college and career readiness from college?
We have a lot of models across the nation. Kentucky in particular has done it.
I'm just wondering if
in
Oregon, if there has been an embracing of that. Nancy, you were next.
Yeah, just two things. When Hilda mentions that I said we'll go to DC if we need to, what that was really about is, in this conversation, we hear that the Northwest accreditation says you have to have, there's a barrier around that you have to have exactly the equivalence of, like, a master's in physics if you're going to teach. And if that doesn't make sense, we have to push back, is all I'm saying about that. We can't be held to something that doesn't make sense. The other side, and I think we all want the courses to be rigorous, and I really appreciate where the community college faculty is coming from. What's curious to me is international baccalaureate courses seem to be very accepted. And so there is a method there, and I think the way it is through the college boards, there's an auditing process, which is kind of like proficiency, where if a high school teacher is going to teach it, they have some training, and the course syllabus gets audited to make sure it is at the level of what the college is, so the community college. So I appreciate that there's models out there, and I think we're right where you are. We want it to be rigorous, but maybe, and if there's an accreditation process that doesn't make sense or whatever, we just have to keep working to find the solution. So it's a great place to be at, I think.
I think Mark has actually broken ground with his promise on that, as a matter of fact, and looked at how you create alignment, how you create rigor, and translate that both at the high school level and have it accepted at the community college level. I think that there are models like that, and the replication of it. I think Hilda's point that a lot is going on already. What we were trying to say in a cohesive document is that there are a lot of individual efforts, but we need a cohesive vision of how this all flows together. And so what we tried to do is say, not that all of these need to be, in fact, it may be that community colleges can come together and make some of those adjustments without legislation, but they may not. We think the fifth-year program is a great example. I think the state board is, Rob Saxon said the state board is probably going to consider whether the fifth-year programs can be considered part of a 4-year.
Yeah, that's already being addressed. It should be fixed in June.
Yeah, and that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is the funding, which hasn't been quite fixed. But there's but this, what we're trying to lay out is a cohesive vision, a well-integrated cohesive vision of what happens in this transition and how do we move from this point to that point. What are the various efforts that need to help us in that transition.
Lynn, do you want to?
So thank you for your great work here. I just wanted to make a few points about how to drive this to an action agenda. I think this is really critical work, and that there's a great time frame that we have to identify to get this work done. So I would respectfully suggest calling it re-engineering as opposed to reimagining, because it puts a little more drive to it and says, let's get this done. Let's not be talking about it 20 years from now. And I don't mean that you have been talking about it for 20 years. I just mean that I get concerned by things that aren't, that are kind of abstract. I also think in terms of all the good points here, it would be great for each of your recommendations to put a goal, a measure, and a timeline. And I say that again respectfully, this is a very substantive piece. There are many people and organizations in the world today who stop reading at page 3. And so an executive summary here that takes each of your recommendations, says goal, timeline, measurement, is really critical to getting traction with these ideas. And I like the ideas so much that I want to ensure they get traction. So thank you for your work. And if we could just tighten it up and say, this is something we got to do, this isn't optional. It's a little, as someone who's 60 years old, to read a document like this, it's a little challenging to me from the standpoint that we seem to have gone backwards in so many areas. There used to be an expectation of, among immigrant and some of the poorest families in this state, that their children would automatically go to college, or some form of higher education. So I think my urgency is reflecting my age and the fact that we seem to have gone backwards in the last 20 or 30 years on things that used to be taken for granted in Oregon. I mean, I went to community college, I went to public school, I was always expected to go to college. So I think we're losing ground, and that's part of my field, that we've got to make up some lost time here.
Those are great points.
So
We are still very much in draft. You know, this was early. We were a little bit afraid to even introduce it, but you know, it's good to get it out there. But thank you for those.
So I'm just going to recommend a couple of ideas, and I'm going to ask committee where they're willing. First, I'm wondering if it would be helpful for Hilda, at the very least, and if Mark and David were willing to join in some way when the committee meets, so that you could get an understanding across all the work that's getting done, who's doing what, and start to share language specifically around the targets and the timelines that Lynn suggests. That might be helpful. I know Hilda's willing. I don't know what time Mark and David have, or if that's necessary at this point. You guys could decide that. The other thing is, we are going to have a joint meeting with the HEC this afternoon, and I still get confused as to what they're working on versus some of these topics as well. And so I was thinking in our meeting this afternoon, if the two of you would take responsibility for really thinking about this list and helping us do that crosswalk around what are the things we're hearing in the HEC that we can now share with this work group and with the groups that Hilda knows are working on all of this, that all have long titles, which is why I can never remember which one is doing which group piece of work. But if we could start to do a chart as to who's working on what, and include the timelines and what success looks like, I think it might help us move these along.
I tell you what I'm willing to and unwilling to do.
Okay,
Right. It does frame this. I'm unwilling to serve on another 9 to 14 committee. Okay, when there's 4 or 5 of them. What I am willing to do is, if we consolidated the effort and prioritized some focus.
That's what I think you guys are.
I think that's what you have in mind. I'm just phrasing it that way because I think that is part of our frustration right now. We're doing the Oregon way on this one. You know, there's always hope for another committee. Until we pull this and consolidate what it is,
I agree.
we're spinning our wheels.
And thank you. I'm not going to take credit for having already thought about that. I was just throwing out a hope.
Yep.
And you framed it a little tighter. Did you want to add to that? Okay. So I'm going to ask Hilda to follow up with each of you to make sure that we actually get this into some framework, hopefully by the next meeting. Maybe we could all have a visual, maybe. We're good at those visuals to show us who's working on what, that would have at least some hope for timelines there with success outcomes. Okay. Ask for a motion to extend. Okay. I need to ask for a motion to extend the meeting 15 minutes so that we can finish. We are going to take a few things off the agenda. Hilda has talked to a few people, but we have to do a few business things before we
Well, thank you for your time, and there's plenty of copies to share with the, your larger meeting this afternoon if you want. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I ask for the motion, I'm going to say we're going to move developmental education participation rates and outcomes to April.
Can I make one suggestion there? The slides that Michelle has provided you, if you look at the bottom, the notes that she's provided are very succinct, and that way we could come in with questions and specific, starting this discussion way before our next meeting. So I would suggest that probably in a week and a half, you send to me any of those questions and beginning points for recommendations so that Michelle doesn't have to represent, but can hit high points and then answer our questions.
So do I hear a motion to extend at least 10, 15 minutes so we can finish up those last items?
I so moved.
Second. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? I won't even ask for discussion.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move forward. Anyone opposed? Okay. Hillary, would you give us a very quick 1-minute status on Accelerated Learning Committee?
It's in the packets, and it's basically reporting on some of the things you heard today, as well as an update on the meeting tomorrow. We believe that by April, we will have more information to share. The group did not meet during the February month because of legislators' commitments.
Okay, and next up, we have perceptions of parents of elementary level EL students on the EL program progress. Let's see, we have Toya. No? Okay, we'll have you introduce yourself because I guess we're doing different presenters. Go ahead.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Nidna Simian, and thank you so much, first of all, for the time that you've given us to talk about ELL. It's really important to us. And this is Jennifer. You know, before Jennifer starts talking about and sharing a little bit about our ELL project, I'd just like to just say that I'm the East Multnomah organizer for STAND, and I work with primarily parents from Reynolds School District. And part of my job is to listen to the different concerns that they have and really work together to see how we can support not only the students, but the district as well. And just to point out that in the last year and a half that I've been working with the parents as an organizer, I've had the experience of having different conversations with them where I heard many times their concerns around their ELL students and how they're performing in schools. The need to get them to a place of success, not only through their high school years, but on to college. And so this project started because of that. It started because parents were asking a lot of questions, and I realized that there was a lot of unanswered questions about ELL. And this project definitely has given me some of the tools as an organizer to help the parents, give them a tool to understand, you know, about ELL and how to support their children in education. And so with that, I'd like to leave Jennifer to give you a little bit of what we found in the last 3 or 4 months, talking with the different school districts and parents.
So I'm Jennifer Covarrubias, and I have been working with STAND directly associated with this project. Because of the time constraints, I am going to let you read through the report about our process and the participants. There's a list of all the people who have participated in our study, and just go straight on to our findings. Our findings in a nutshell, when we looked at parent engagement or school engagement with parents of English language learners, was that schools have done a really very good job of communicating with parents about school practices and expectations, and also in providing all of the legally required information about students' enrollment and placement in ELD programs. However, when it comes to individual student progress towards English language proficiency, there are many gaps in the information that parents receive, particularly in comparison to the information that parents receive about progress in other academic subject areas. This is especially true at the elementary school level, where ELD is often structured like a special class, such as music or PE, but there's no legally required system of personalized feedback like there would be, say, for example, with an IEP for a special education student. I want to stress that our recommendations are not in any way indications that the districts we've worked with are not complying with state and federal statutes regarding English language learners. By all accounts, they're working very diligently to uphold the law, and what we're talking about is gaps between practice and what the law recommends or requires schools to do. So our recommendations are based on all of the information and feedback we've received and are designed to provide some guidance for state and district level initiatives to improve parent engagement, and also to provide some really practical suggestions for increasing and improving the communication between schools and parents about their child's individual progress in English language development. And I would point out that many of these suggestions can be easily incorporated into existing communications at minimal cost. We're happy to report that there's already some movement in one of the districts we worked with on including ELD in elementary school report cards as a result of the conversations that we've had. While some of the ideas that are in the list may have already been implemented by individual schools or districts, our observation is that the changes on this list can benefit students in every district that we've worked with and students across the state of Oregon. And thanks again for having us, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Very nicely done, and the recommendations are very helpful, and I'm already thinking about where to integrate that into my district, and I think you're exactly right. We do a great job of complying, but do we really give the information that the parents need? And this is something we saw in our district, and I think it's actually a pretty easy fix, and that we can make a recommendation to have ODE take a look at these as part of the work we're doing in the ELL strategic plan. Committee members, any suggestions, thoughts?
It might go into our OEIB strategic plan as well.
That's right.
So are you saying this information on English language development's not included in report cards or communications to parents?
And many elementary schools, it is not, and which actually really surprised me as a parent of 2 native English speakers that, you know, it wouldn't have ever been included in my report card, but it's not in a lot of kids' report cards. Or there might be a checklist that says satisfactory, unsatisfactory. And the one required legal document, which is the parent placement letter schools must send out in the fall, is required to tell the student's current level, but doesn't provide any history usually. So a parent who looks at that document does not know where their student was the year before, and so can't really follow the trajectory and if they should be getting more involved in the process.
And probably what we should also be including is what is best practice showing. We found students, for example, staying at level 1 for 4 years, which research shows is absolutely absurd. But also our teachers didn't even know that information. So if they're in an ELD class with an ELL teacher, the classroom teachers might not even know. And so sharing that responsibility, I think there's a lot of work we can be done around that. And I agree with you, I don't think these are fixes that would cost a great deal of money. They can fit right into the strategies we're already using, so.
When I summarized, I cut out my little spiel at the beginning that we actually had 2 objectives going into this. One was to look at the process and find where the gaps are, but also to educate ourselves about the process of English language development in the state of Oregon and to be part of the solution in terms of improving that communication. So we are actively involved in that, and we hope that other community groups can be involved too.
Great, so we can do our work around this, and if you'll continue to let us know what further work you do that we can help with in terms of improving outcomes for ELLs. Lynn, and then Hilda.
It seems to me there's some other partners in this process that may be helpful to you, so, and to the schools to extend their resources beyond. Because, for example, when we are working with, in my organization, when we are working with ELL learners in our Intercept program, part of our responsibility as social workers is to work with the parent to ensure that the teachers and the school system are giving them the information they need. And so we work with parents to get clear on how to ask for that information and then how to make sure it happens. So at a minimum, you've got the provider communities in the schools that can be engaged with the teachers to help in this effort. The other question I would have, and I didn't see it in your recommendations, is it seems to me some orientation to ELL parents, just like we do orientation for special needs kids and IEP kids, etc., at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, specifically on this point and how to do it might be helpful.
And if I may just really quickly add that because of this conversation and the findings that Jennifer just presented to you, the parents have been discussing these things and these examples of things that we could do at a local level, and the report card is one of them, certainly. We started that conversation, how can we see our students' progress in the report card? And what can the district do to open up a communication and understanding to parents of how this process works, right? Like either they're talking about either having meetings with the ELD teachers once or twice a year, or a community forum where they're talking about ELD and everything underneath that. So yes, these are thankfully with the parents who are discussing those things. Absolutely.
Just was going to mention that I had a very short conversation with David Batista. He's looking forward to, after the ELL state conference this week, to sitting down and actually digging into each of these and giving some suggestions about how we could push things forward into, and then that will come back to this group next time. Great, that sounds like something to hear.
Thank you so much. We look forward to continuing to work with you guys.
We do have two people who signed up for public comment. Karen Twain. Is Karen here still? Okay, and Carmen Ellis. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Carmen Ellis. I am the director of the Visual Teaching Project, which is an advocacy group based in Portland for early childhood educators. And I came here today to hear your update on the kindergarten readiness assessment. I am really excited personally about the implementation of that assessment and the opportunities that I think that affords us in the field of early childhood. I've taught in best practices demonstration schools and have supervised and trained teachers in best practices in the field. I've been in the field for over 10 years myself. So I want to speak to that issue of best practices. Something that a lot of people don't realize in our field is that just like in other areas of education, early childhood has best practices. These are play-based, they are relationship-based, and they are based in evidence and in research. And I want to implore you, as you move forward with your assessments, to help teachers hold tightly to those best practices. In early childhood, we've seen our K-12 peers at times let go of what we call developmentally appropriate practice in order to begin to teach to a test. And I've noticed in my conversations with my peers in early childhood that this has created what I would term to be a huge fear in early childhood and a lot of resistance to the policy that you are trying to implement. I feel like I'm someone who has kind of a finger on the pulse in the field. I work in a lot of different schools, a lot of different childhood development centers, and have this advocacy work going right now. And I feel like something that's holding us back is that people are looking for your assurance and inclusion in your message that you understand that our practice is based in research and that we have best practices and that you're not asking for us to give that up. Brett Walker spoke to that fear of people going to flashcards and that kind of testing and the pencil-based assessments that they were talking about. And I want to assure you that as someone who's in the field, that people do have that fear. And that when I'm talking to early childhood educators, they're saying, well, I don't want to have an assessment, the kids are all ready. And because what they're fearing is that the money that comes in grants and the money that comes through your initiatives is going to be tied to them teaching a particular way and that they'll be asked to give up.
Thank you, Carmen, very much. Your time is up. Thank you for coming today. And thank you to the committee. I will adjourn us.